All right, we're back at it.
Corey, super. We're back at it, excited again. We've got another fantastic guest. A lot has happened since the last time we had a podcast.
Well, we actually finally got a rate cut.
I can't believe it. We've been talking
There's
about this for over
relief for some
Yeah.
people out there, right? It's everybody's been just, what are we, 24 months waiting for this to happen?
Well, as they say about economists, is that they're never wrong. It just hasn't happened yet. So we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and sometimes you thought they might be wrong, but no, it really did happen.
Yeah, it's them and the weatherman.
How do you think that's going to affect things in the next 12 months, Corey?
I really think that this is the beginning, right? Like they're going to continue at a very, very slow pace to cut. And I think, it'll slowly loosen that squeeze that people have had on their wallets. I suspect we're going to see the housing market start to revive here a little bit. And, so I think it'll be good. And I think, for automotive, recreational, discretionary spending, I think it's all good, right?
There's a lot of homeowners or future homeowners sitting on the sidelines right now waiting for this. I think they've been timing their purchases. I've been asked a million times, when is it going down? Because the rates were getting so high, it became unaffordable.
Totally, right? So this is the beginning, and I think it's big brother south of us, they'll follow soon enough, right? And I think this is the beginning for North America, and get us back on track, and just let's move ahead here. And I think coming into being an election year in the States, they're going to want to start to cut those rates, right? So I think it's coming all around. So I think it's very positive.
I think between COVID and this interest rate hikes, it's really given a lot of people a lot of scares on their financial security, on their cash flows. It's really given them a good look on, what does overspending look like? How much am I saving, and am I secure?
Well, it's, and for the people that are middle and low income, this has been tragic, right? Like to have a family of four, an average grocery bill 4 years ago of $1,200, $1,300 is now blowing through $2,000. There's no capacity there to handle that.
None.
You have to start making some difficult decisions, right? Probably a few less stops at McDonald's, probably a few less stops at Tim Hortons or Starbucks, which both missed in their earnings.
Or even vehicles.
Right? And
extra expenses, travel.
All of it, right?
Vehicles, unaffordable almost.
Totally, right? If you start looking at average vehicle prices, like they've skyrocketed, and you start throwing on a 7%, 8% interest rate on there, that's not affordable.
That's right.
So, but moving ahead, we have a really wonderful guest here today.
Someone I've been very excited to talk to, and we've been back and forth a few times, and really, really glad you're here.
Yes, and so today we have Stephen Bartolo with us, who is the CEO of Shepherds of Good Hope. And he spearheads innovative programming and services at Shepherds of Good Hope, a natural relationship builder. He has been instrumental in developing and nurturing partnerships, helping shape Shepherds of Good Hope into the leading community organization and social agency that is today. Stephen's passion is connecting all stakeholders to the organization's vision. Stephen began his Shepherds of Good Hope career in 2002 as a volunteer, experiencing many different aspects of the organization. Since then, from frontline employee to program manager, senior manager, director of operations, vice president, senior vice president, and his current role as CEO. He holds an executive MBA with a specialization in innovation, postgraduate certificates in risk and program management, professional designation in executive leadership coaching. Stephen is committed to enhancing the experiences of staff, volunteers, and individuals utilizing the Shepherd services. He is also deeply committed to sustainability, both fiscal and environmental. Under his leadership, he will continue his steadfast commitment to end chronic homelessness in Ottawa by continuing to expand supportive housing and achieving the Shepherd's vision. Homes for all, community for all, hope for all. Stephen, welcome to the show.
That was the most flattering introduction I have ever received. Thank you very much. That's great.
Welcome. Yeah, well, you've done a lot of work.
Glad to have you here. You're a pretty important organization in this city and done some pretty incredible things. So we're really happy to have you here today.
Awesome. Listen, I feel like I've made the big time. I've wanted to be on this podcast for a while. This is, I was mentioning to you guys earlier. I was with Al and Neil last week on All in a Day, but I don't know. This is the big time here, so this is good.
Well, it's you've hit the top, right? There's nowhere else to go from here. So
this is it. Yeah, Joe Rogan's next. I think that's
yeah.
That's really appreciate you coming on, and you've clearly got a great history with your organization. Being a volunteer and starting there, and staying committed to become the CEO shows to me a love and a passion for that organization. Could you tell us a little bit about what initially drew you to that organization when you first started there?
That's a really good question, actually. It would have been, this is going back a bit now, right? So this is, late 90s, early 2000s. I guess you can say that, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I was doing my undergrad at Carleton University. So it was in criminology. And like Shawn, I had a big passion for community-based policing. So I always wanted to be a police officer. My older sister was a police officer with the RCMP, and I wanted to get my criminology degree. And then while I was doing that, I was like, I need frontline experience. Like, I really need to know like what's happening on the ground. And did some research in Ottawa and found Shepherds of Good Hope that really specialize working with the most marginalized, the most complex people in the city, but also a disproportionate amount of Indigenous individuals use their services. At the time, I think it was closer to 25 or 30%. And I thought, that's a place I want to volunteer. And I think I was in my second or my third year of my undergrad, and I started volunteering. And it was as simple as just, at first it was helping with laundry, then it was in the drop-in, and it was, serving snacks and listening to stories. And then when I finished my undergrad, I was like, you know what, I want a good 6 months of experience before I go to Depot for RCMP. And I loved that 6 months. And we were at the staff Christmas party, and I was a frontline staff. And the HR director at the time maybe had one glass of wine too much, and she was like, really sad to see you go, because we wanted to make you the next manager of our harm reduction programs. And then I thought, wait a second, that's pretty awesome. And I was like, I really have to think about this, because I'm really passionate about this idea of community-based policing, but like, let's be honest, I don't like guns, and I don't know how to parallel park. So like my future as a police officer could be devastatingly off on the wrong foot, right? So I was like, you know what, I'm going to put that on hold. And I'm going to start this journey where I'm going to kind of switch my focus from frontline work to more of middle management work. And, I fell in love with that. And then, I guess it was probably every 2 or 3 years when maybe the organization got the inkling of like, okay, he's ready. It was, okay, here's your next challenge at Shepherds of Good Hope, right? So I think one of the unique things from my perspective is I've seen it all, right? I've seen it through the lens as, a citizen in Ottawa. I've seen it through the lens as a volunteer, as a frontline staff, as a manager, as a director, and now as the CEO. So, I mean, I stay because I'm incredibly passionate about the vision. I think ending chronic homelessness in our city is completely doable. But I love our team, and I love the culture that we've created and continue to create.
Well, you're a pretty young guy to have been in the same organization for as long as you have, right? So that's, or, is it just some really good makeup?
I like to joke to say they took a chance and they hired me when I was 9, but but you know what? So I started my journey when I was 22, and I've been there for coming up on 23 years. So do the math. So
yeah.
Wow.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. That's fantastic. Right?
There's probably a real advantage to also to have someone coming up through the organization. I see that almost to be more of a trend now. I just was reading an article in the Business Journal last week about the CEO for the Canadian operations for IKEA, and they had started off as in the warehouse, working on the front line in that organization, and had worked themselves up. And I'm sure they didn't have, at that time, aspirations to be CEO. I had no idea. And I'm sure when you were, at the front line, you weren't thinking one day I'll be CEO. It's just like, hey, I really believe in this organization. I like working here, and clearly made a really good decision when that opportunity was presented to you.
Thanks. It's you know what? You're right. I didn't think I was going to be the CEO. But I would say about maybe about 10 years ago, I thought, I think this could be a logical next step when I was a senior VP. The one thing I will say too is, like, even if you look at the banking industry, right, where a lot of the time the succession planning is done internally, right? And I like that for our industry, for social profits, right? Bring someone through, understand the culture, understand what's going on. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in, even though I'm passionate about succession planning, I would say my philosophy is for every 3 or 4 of my managers or senior leaders, I like to bring in one person externally just to have that fresh perspective, right? So
Sure.
as passionate I am about succession planning, sometimes you can get desensitized to things, right? So sometimes that is the risk when you've been there for that long and you've seen things. But the great thing about Shepherd's, which I imagine we'll get into over this podcast, is we are way bigger than what most people think, right? So even though I've been at Shepherd's for 23 years, every 2 or 3 years, I've been doing something different within the organization. So it was always a really fresh perspective of, like, okay, I've been really working on shelter-based programs. Now I'm on supportive housing. Now I'm focusing more on sustainability. Now I'm focusing more on, government or partnership relationships. So it's been a fascinating journey.
Where do you find right now is, like, where are the biggest challenges for you guys?
Oh boy. Okay. There are a lot of challenges, but at the same time, I wake up every morning as an optimist, right? So what the biggest challenges? What I've been saying for the last couple of years is, I talk to a lot of people about what we do, right? So, generally people will say, like, why is there so much, homelessness in Ottawa or in Canada, right? And they would say, sometimes you talk about what you think are the surface issues that you'd see, right? In terms of, like, oh, is it because there's an increase in substance use challenges or mental health challenges or trauma, which they don't generally mention, but trauma, I will tell you, is at the forefront 99.4%.
What type?
Well, all forms of trauma, but childhood trauma mostly, right?
Childhood.
So it's just when you look at the majority of the individuals that access our services, they have experienced a certain level of trauma. But what I used to tell people, though, is it's not those things. It's there isn't enough non-market housing. There's just not enough housing, right? So, and it might sound like it's simple, but we have to double our non-market housing stock, over the next 5 years, which is going to be a huge challenge for Canada. And when I say non-market housing, I'm talking about affordable housing. I'm talking about supportive housing, which is what Shepherd's does, so we can get into that. And then also just rent geared to income, right? There's just a lot of people in Ottawa, in Canada, that just can't afford this housing market, right? So non-market housing is the way to go. That's what's going to get people out from experiencing chronic homelessness. So that's what I've been saying. But the more I've been thinking about it in the last couple of months, that's obviously a big piece. But the other big thing right now is, and it's hard to use a specific word. So how I would explain it is maybe like a lack of humanity or a lack of curiosity. And what I mean by that is the world has just become a little bit more divisive, a little bit more angry and intolerant and frustrated. And we're losing the faces and the individuality of the individuals that are experiencing chronic homelessness. So right off the bat, no one chooses to be homeless. No one wakes up and says, I think it would be great if I could live in an emergency shelter with 250 other people.
Of course.
No one wants that.
No.
And sometimes we forget that, this statistic is a person, right? With the same aspirations and the same fears and the same dreams as you and I, their family members, their friends, their citizens. And sometimes we forget that, right? So as I was mentioning to you guys earlier, I take LRT when I come into work every day. When I'm getting off at Rideau, and I see someone who might be struggling, and Perhaps they've overdosed, or they've just used, or they're just tired, but they're essentially passed out and they're lying down. And I just see people like walking over individuals constantly, right? No one actually stopping and just saying, "Are you okay?" That concerns me a little bit. So that's obviously one challenge, is just, from my perspective and from other social profit organizations, is how do we bring the humanity back into our work, right? How do we bring that care and that curiosity of everyday citizens to say, like, to be really demanding, to say, we shouldn't have emergency shelters in our city. Like, everyone should have a home. Like, it's
Right.
a human right. So what do we have to do as a country to get people out of shelters and into their homes? So when we give people homes of their own, that I always say that solves 90% of the issues. Now, some of the individuals have been experiencing homelessness for a very long time, and they have some complex issues. So you still have to attach wraparound supports to those individuals so that they're going to be successful. So I would say that's our biggest challenge, is just getting individuals out, right? So it's a real culture shift for us in terms of, like, one of the things I'm really proud about at Shepherd's is we now have more supportive housing beds than we do shelter beds. So a lot of the times when people think Shepherd's of Good Hope, they think, oh, I think it's that emergency shelter at King Edward and Murray, and there's a soup kitchen there. And that's true. That's our origins, right? So we opened in 1983. But since the early 2000s, and in particular the last 10 years, we've been hyper-focused on lowering our footprint in terms of shelter beds and building permanent solutions.
Which is what you're doing right now, I believe, the new facility.
Which is what we're doing right now. So if you're driving down Murray Street, 216 Murray, you're going to see a state-of-the-art building that's coming up right now, working with PBC Construction and CSV Architects. It's 48 permanent homes for individuals that are experiencing chronic homelessness. This building specifically, we're going to be focusing on individuals that identify as Indigenous or women. That's kind of our first tranche that we're going to be putting in. That building's a little bit different too. So it's supportive housing, but it also has a purpose-built state-of-the-art community kitchen, so that we can actually do all of our meals for our shelter residents, for those residents, but also for those in the community that might also not necessarily be experiencing homelessness, but might be close to experiencing homelessness. So a place where they can go and get a free lunch. The other thing that we're doing on the main floor is that we're doing a low barrier drop-in. So it's a safe place where individuals can go that are experiencing homelessness during the day. So they can come in, they can get out of the heat, they can get out of the cold, and we'll have partnering agencies in there working with them to give them the supports to get them that permanent housing. So if all goes well, that ribbon is going to be cut somewhere between February and May of next year. So that's really exciting. We just finished a large build on Maryville. And we do have pre-development funding to build more on Maryville, and that's something we're working on right now with our architects.
Corey and I were just at the Taste of Hope not too long ago, raising money to help furnish and raise money, of course, for the organization and the foundation for that build.
Yeah.
Very powerful. How much was raised in that event?
So in that event, we were well over $300,000, which was just phenomenal, right? I always
Incredible.
say, what a great event, right? We previously did it at the Horticultural Center. This was our first time downtown at Shaw. Just amazing. The vibe was great. I joke with David, my counterpart in the foundation, who's the CEO, that when I close my eyes, this is a 7-figure event by the end of the decade. And this is the event that I want people to put in their calendars the day it's done, saying, I want one of those tickets next year. But yeah, an absolute event, and just bringing the community together to support such a great cause.
Having the room set up to say, hey, you can help furnish a room. I think that was a very powerful gesture. I think that was a good way to kind of get everybody grounded and want to contribute and share.
Well, it's a challenge for somebody that's, has a nice life to kind of visualize what this even means or looks like.
Absolutely. One of the things that we offer at Shepherd's of Good Hope, right, in terms of how can you help, right? So one of the things obviously is if you are in a bit more of a privileged position, you can donate, right? You can make a one-time donation, or you can do a monthly donation, or you could even consider a legacy gift, right?
Of course.
Even as the CEO, I do all three, right? So I regularly donate to the organization by sponsoring our events. I've been a monthly donor practically since I started over 20 years ago. And my family is a legacy giver, and that when we updated our will, we are going to leave, hopefully a large amount of money to the organization. So there's that, but not everyone's in that situation, right? So then, what else can you do? You can volunteer, right? So you can come in, what used to be every day, which is just not practical in today's world, right? So maybe it's once a week or it's once a month, and before that was coming to our drop-in and helping serve some meals or just sit down with our guests and just have regular conversation with them. But now that we've expanded supportive housing, we have residences in the East End, so almost directly beside the Montfort Hospital on Montreal Road. We have a residence in Canada on Castle Frank. We have one in the Market on St. Andrew. We're going to have another one on Murray Street, and we've got two on Maryville. So we're actually very strategically, geographically dispersed. So depending on where you live, if it's once a week or once a month, you can just come into the residence. You can help serve breakfast, help serve lunch, help serve dinner, do some laundry, or literally just sit down and play a game of chess or a game of checkers and just have conversation when we're building that sense of community, right? So community integration is really important to us. How do we integrate the residents and the individuals into the community, but also how do we integrate the community into Shepherds of Good Hope? So that's important.
You talked about the divide earlier. Like there's a little bit of we're in a state of division. I can remember growing up and I don't think it was like this. In the 70s, I would read about this. You'd read about this in the 50s, and you read about this terrible discrimination and huge divides and huge political divides. Mm-hmm. And I almost felt like what I was reading about and hearing about was something that I wasn't used to seeing, even though we hadn't fixed it all yet. But now I feel like we've regressed. I feel like we're in a worse spot than we were before. I feel more divisive. So I feel like as you're speaking, I think you've nailed it. I just feel like there must be so many people who just don't connect that way. They look at it like it's me versus them, or it's there's a reason why someone might be homeless and it's not my problem. And I think it is our problem until, like you said earlier, until we have a situation where there's no homelessness, it's everybody's problem. So what are some of the challenges that you have with public's perceptions and the helplessness that your residents feel? Because again, there must be a real strong sense of helplessness.
It is challenging, right? And I would say, and I think you worded it really well, Shawn, when you were saying, it needs to be everyone's problem. Sometimes how I sometimes like to reframe that is that it's everyone's opportunity, right? And a recent example for us is Maryville, right? So we have a new residence on Maryville. We opened, I think, April of last year. So 58, permanent homes. It was going well. And then last fall, we very proactively decided to do like a town hall. And we just said, hey, everybody, we've been here for the last year. We want to build a little bit more on our property. We have a really big property. We have an opportunity here to build something where we can get more people, out of the shelters. And, there were some members of the community that didn't like that. And so we've been having this back and forth challenge with, I would say, not in my backyard. So, quote unquote NIMBYism over the last 6 months in particular with not a large group in Maryville. It's a smaller group, but it's a vocal group. And they've been, pretty consistently emailing the councillor, the mayor, the premier, just saying we don't want non-market housing, in our neighborhood. And when I think about that, and when I talk to other social profit leaders and I talk to my team, it's like, and there's a couple of individuals in particular that are literally working on this, like, which seems like 24 hours a day, right? So it was just like, if they spent 10% of that time on just being a little bit more curious and how could I help integrate these individuals into the community? Like, what a powerful message
Amazing. It would be.
that
It would
would
do
be,
so much.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a bit of a coordinated messaging that happened a little while ago where there were I'd say about 25 or 30 emails that within the span of a couple of hours went to the city that just said, you know, we don't want shepherds to expand in this
Sure.
neighborhood. So it was, the timing was a bit curious. It seemed quite, quite coordinated.
But probably if you asked anybody, if you were to pull anybody individually aside and said, "Can you tell me your values as a human being?" Any one of those people that had sent that email, as an example, on their own, might say, "Oh, I want to help one another, believe in the human beings, support my neighbor, love each other." Like there'd be a whole bunch of very important, strong values, but that this would be inconsistent to probably who they are as a core human.
Absolutely. And so like one of the things that's really important for us when we think about community integration and about, really giving that dignity and that compassion back, to all human beings is we always message these individuals and we say, we would love the opportunity to go for coffee, right? We would love the opportunity to sit down at your kitchen table and just chat about what we do and why we do it.
Sure.
And more importantly, we would love to walk you through our residence so you can see it firsthand. So I would say, for every 10 people that we write a letter that say, I don't want this in my neighborhood, at least 9 do not respond to that letter. But the one that does, and when we walk them through, the consistent message is, this isn't what I thought it was, or
Right.
this isn't what I was led to believe it was. And a large percentage of those individuals actually start volunteering at the facility. So it's really powerful, right? So like one of the things that we have to do, one of the things that I have to do better is just really get the stories out of our residents in the community as to like Shepherds of Good Hope is part of the solution to end chronic homelessness. It is not part of the problem, right? So like if Shepherds just decided not to build more non-market housing, not to help people, that doesn't mean the challenges we face in society disappear. They're still there, but then they actually lack the wraparound supports that we offer to every individual that we work with.
They write books and do movies about this kind of conversion in humanity, right? About someone experiencing something and then suddenly seeing it differently and acting differently. This is not a perfect example, but I see this. I saw this in a hockey rink when someone's screaming at my son, who's a goalie, and they're saying awful things. So then I would purposely grab my coffee, and my wife would give me a nudge, like, don't go over there. But I would just sit down next to the person, have my coffee, not say anything, and then we'd just start chatting. And then I'd say, who's your kid? And they'd say, oh, that's my son's a defenseman. And they'd say, oh, who's your kid? And I'd say, oh, that's my son in the net over there. And as soon as they realized that the person they've been saying awful things about is my son, they would stop that behavior because they don't feel good about it anymore.
Right.
So I know that's a silly example, but I think that's kind of the same awful human behavior that we all do, is that if we can get away with it, we can act a certain way or say awful things, or it's not my issue. But if you were to walk down and see the facility and see the humans that need your help, you would act and behave and say and react a lot differently. I mean, I was very fortunate to have come down there and spent an afternoon. I was in a state of curiosity. I just wanted to know more about Shepherds. I wanted to know more about the organization, who it helps, how it serves, the scope of your work. And that was very impactful. I mean, that's, to me, it's like almost like a life-changing moment, because you're like, I had no idea, one, the scope. You're a whole city within a city. You've got infrastructure there that I never realized you had infrastructure for. And the level of care is incredible. So I just don't know how it's a challenge must be to get that message, to get that connection for everybody else in the city.
I think
I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. I'm just saying it's. I think it's important just to be, even for myself as the CEO, just to understand that there are significant challenges in the community. Like even when you guys opened up today, right? Like interest rates have been so high for so long. I mean, since we haven't seen them since the financial crisis, right? The cost of living, the cost of raw materials are just at a point we haven't experienced. And the one thing that we haven't talked enough about as a community is that there is a toxic drug crisis in our country from coast to coast to coast, right? So it's not just individuals that are experiencing chronic homelessness that are struggling with the toxic drug crisis. It's in the suburbs, it's in our everyday lives, right? And there was someone in one of the communities that, sent me some data recently. I think they pulled it off of like a Power BI from the Ottawa Police website, and they were like, look at drug overdoses have increased in the Carlington ward, over the last year. This must be a result of Shepherds of Good Hope living in here. And, and I looked at the data and I said, well, that is interesting. There has been an increase in overdoses in this community. But let's be a little bit more curious. Let's look at every single ward in Ottawa. It's an explosion. It's
Right.
across the entire city.
So some wards that don't have that same data, the data still went up.
We have a toxic drug
Sure,
crisis, right?
sure.
And then so the question really isn't like, oh, well, there's overdoses, so we should stop building non-market housing. The question is, how do we help the toxic drug crisis? How do we help people in general, right? Like we need more treatment services. We need more counseling services. We need more prevention. Like we just have to look at things a little bit differently, right? But to a point that you just mentioned too, Shawn, when you came for the tour downtown, most people don't recognize that we actually have a recognized health facility at 256 King Edward, right? So when you're driving by, you might say to your friend or your partner, oh my goodness, there's yet another ambulance or another police cruiser at Shepherds of Good Hope again. Like why is it happening 10, 15 times a day? We actually have a recognized target engagement diversion program. So it's designed so that when an officer or a paramedic, picks up somebody or has an interaction in the community with someone who's known to us that's experiencing chronic homelessness, instead of taking them to the emergency room because they might be under the influence of mood-altering substances, which isn't a crime, it's a health issue,
Yep.
where that officer would be tied up for anywhere between 5 and 10 hours, they can actually do a diversion with our nurses that are in the building 24 hours a day in less than 5 minutes. And then that frees up the police officer to be back on the street to do more community-based policing. It frees up the paramedic to be back on the street so that when there is a crisis somewhere else, there's an ambulance that can be able to respond. And we actually do now well over 100 diversions a month, to the point where, when I'm speaking to superintendents and deputy chiefs, it's how do we expand this program? So it's a wonderful program. It's actually, there's police chiefs all across Canada that want to adopt it, and why not, right? It's a win-win.
That's a lot of man hours.
It's a lot. It's a lot of hours that save officers to do
Yes.
more community-based policing, for paramedics to have better health outcomes, and then we just have to be, I like to use the term, a bit more braggadocious, about this program. We run it in partnership with Ottawa Inner City Health. It has such powerful intrinsic value for the city of Ottawa.
So on the toxic drug front, like which drugs are we seeing? I have a sneaky suspicion I know the answers, but I was just kind of curious. Like there's fentanyl, there's there's crack, there's heroin floating around. Like what are you seeing as like the main drug of choice? That is has some pretty terrible ingredients in it.
Absolutely. And you know what? Fair to say, I can't even keep up with it. So
Right.
it changes all the time. But fentanyl for sure. But one of the bigger challenges we've seen in Ottawa over the last 6 months is, so Shepherds runs the only 24/7 supervised consumption site facility in the city. And there are 2 other consumption sites close by where individuals can, bring their own drugs in, and in a supervised setting they can use, so that if there's an overdose, then our team can respond in real time. But those sites are designed for intravenous drug use, so people
Right.
that are injecting. And what we found over the last 6 months or so, maybe over the last year, is that now close to 70% of individuals that are struggling with substance use challenges are no longer injecting or using intravenous drugs. They're now inhaling or smoking. And the consumption sites aren't designed to deal with that. So what does that mean? That means more people now are using these drugs outside in the community. And it also means that they're doing them not in a supervised setting, which means there's more overdoses, more deaths. So I know from an Ottawa public health perspective, we're all working to be like, how can we change this? And I think you'll have to see some form of a pilot project at some point where one of these sites is geared more towards the inhalation. But when we talk about harm reduction, that's just one pillar, right? And then, the police are they have this new hub that's coming into place at Rideau Center soon. So I really welcome the police really focusing on community-based policing, right? Not necessarily through an enforcement lens, but through a rapport lens. Like,
Sure.
I think back to when, you have the same officers on foot or
Right.
on bike, they know everyone by name. That's good. But where we really have to focus our energy too is on prevention, right? So, one of the things we keep talking about our staff in our upcoming strategic plan is how do we prevent people from experiencing homelessness for the very first time? So it's when someone shows up to that shelter, instead of just booking them in, really sitting there and really focusing on diversion and prevention in terms of like, is there somewhere else you could go? Like, could you go home? No, I can't go home. Is there an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother or a friend of a friend? Because the data shows you, if you've never experienced homelessness before, and then you come into the shelter system, the challenges to exit are just exponentially higher, right? So just how do we prevent? And then take that prevention another level, how do we really funnel that money into youth? Because if we're preventing this when they're youth, you're going to have much positive, better outcomes when they're older.
Yeah, I think when you and I talked fairly candidly when I came down there, you had said there's actually like a study showing that there's a certain amount of hours that if you can divert someone prior to, then you've got a very high level of success. And then after a certain period, they've more or less now started to integrate into the system. And so what is that? Is it 72 hours?
Yeah. So our goal is to do a diversion within 96 hours, but
Okay.
that's very challenging because there's a significant lack of options, right? But one of the terms you'll hear us use a lot is chronic homelessness, which is different than homelessness, right? So chronic homelessness we would define, and the federal government would define, as someone who's been in the shelter system for longer than 6 months, so plus 180 days. And I'm a big believer that no one should ever be in the shelter system for 180 days, right? So when we say our goal is to end chronic homelessness, the word chronic is intentional because there's always going to be a certain level of homelessness, right? You might lose your house, you might have, be down on your luck, you might need an emergency intervention, but like that should be 14 to 30 days. And then you're back on your foot and you're in some type of housing. So that's really what we're focusing on.
Well, it's amazing that you have a diversion program. Obviously, it's very successful in your efforts. How difficult is integration of services for your organization? Because there's a lot going on. When I was down there, I mean, you're doing a lot of work in what you're doing with the residents. When I was reading an article prior to your interview today, I believe I read that is it Eileen Leo with the Auto Mission was saying that mental health challenges affect up to 75% of those coming into the mission. So when you have this kind of how much need is there for collaboration amongst other services, other social services, and how difficult is that? Because obviously you're very busy with what you do, and they're very busy with what they do. So how do you manage those needs?
So collaboration is critical, which I would think would be in any line of business or any work, right? Where I prioritize, and the other social profit leaders, we all prioritize getting together on a monthly basis, if not in some cases, a weekly or a biweekly basis, right? In terms of your comment, Shawn, about the amount of services that we do, that presents challenges and opportunities, right? So, one of our core values historically was that if we saw a gap in the community, we would address it. Which is obviously great from an intrinsic perspective because no one's doing this is a problem, we would fix it. But we also grew very fast. And one of the things that we didn't do as good of a job as we could have is really slowing down and saying, is this sustainable, right? At the growth that we're doing, is this sustainable from a capacity perspective, from a skill perspective, from a competency perspective, but also from a financial perspective? Like, are we getting evergreen funding to do this work, because you don't want to do something that is just great and fills a gap, and then all of a sudden you look back a year later and you're being like, oh, we're losing $1 million. We don't have any funding for this. We wouldn't be able to keep it, and then you have to stop it, right? So one of the things that we're really focused on is, there's a term that we use, and it's called a continuum of care, where we literally can take someone right now from their darkest moments, which would be what we call TESP. So we love acronyms in our field, right? So a transitional emergency shelter program, where they're literally either brought to us or they show up at our doors actively under the influence of mood altering substances. And we don't judge them. We meet them where they are, right? So for some individuals, there might be this back and forth every day for 3 months, 6 months, 10 years. But for most, it's when they're showing up, we're always there. And when they're waking up and they're sober and more lucid, we really build rapport, we build trust, where it's like, hey, are you ready for that next step in your journey? And if they are, we jump all over it. But if they're not, we don't push them, because, stats will show you that if you push someone into something and they're not ready for it, it's not going to work. But we create that community, we create that hope, we create that trust, so that it is possible. So that's the beginning of our continuum. And then from there, we actually have different levels of supportive housing based on your complexity level. So we use the term acuity, but just what do you have going on, and how much support do you need to be successful? So we have one building right now in the market, what we would call low complexity, where minimal staffing. You can live pretty independently, right? But you still need that sense of community. You still might need medication management. So we have that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we would have our more complex programs. We have a more complex program on Montreal Road, and then in Maryville, where individuals that were moving in have really experienced chronic homelessness for a long time. They've been institutionalized for a long time. All of them struggling with certain levels of trauma, mental health challenges, substance use challenges, where they all have individualized wraparound health supports with our partnering agency, Ottawa Inner City Health. So it presents challenges when you've got so many different things in your
Sure.
business, but it also presents opportunities.
Does that include mental health support for them? Because clearly it might be, you mentioned earlier about, the high incident rate of trauma. So if someone has trauma, clearly, for you guys, the starting point is the basic fundamentals, shelter, food, support, care, but then it might be, okay, we're going to help you deal with some of these past traumas, or connect you with services that can help in that. Is that part of this continuum of care?
So absolutely, right? And one of the things that we do really well as an organization is we bring those partnering agencies in. So Ottawa Inner City Health, they're our primary health and wellness partner. So it's a team of nurses, a team of RNs, RPNs, client care workers. But we also partner with other organizations on that different lens of that health, right? So the Royal Ottawa Hospital, Canadian Mental Health Association, they come into our residences and our shelter facility on a daily basis.
Wow, that's a lot.
How do you think, we want prevention. We want people to not consume drugs at the end, like that's our end goal. But people are struggling so badly that they're looking for that escape. They're looking for that relief, that ability to stop thinking about, how poor my life is or the decisions I've made. Like, where do you think, in terms of prevention, like where do we start there? Like if you're coming from an underprivileged community where it's rampant everywhere and you grow up that way, like how do you pivot that?
These are some deep questions, Corey.
Sorry.
So
We'll go to commercial right now.
So I appreciate that. I've got a kind of a two-pronged answer to that, right? So the first thing that I would say is, I don't think the goal is necessarily that they stop doing drugs. I think, obviously drugs are unhealthy, and, there are a lot of unhealthy things that we do.
Yes.
But the ultimate goal is that, we're housing them, and that we're integrating them into the community. There are many people who are integrated in the community that are not experiencing homelessness, that engage in substance use.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about them on a daily basis, right? I know even in one of our initiatives, we have something called the Block program, where it's you know, an outside of the box way to integrate individuals who are experiencing homelessness, where we're saying we want you to be part of the solution. So we're giving, you know, jobs and opportunities to our residents and our guests to reestablish what we would call healthy community norms, right? Which were hit really hard during the pandemic and the beginning of the toxic drug crisis, because we lost many people to overdose, right? So when they see people and they're a block leader, they would say, you know, you would say, guys, like, you're using drugs right now, you know, out in the open. That's not a normal community norm, right?
Right.
There's somewhere we can
Right.
do that. Or, hey, you're panhandling. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You need to do that, but don't aggressively panhandle, right? Don't follow someone down the street and scream at them if they
Because
don't
it's-
give you money.
Right.
Right. You can sit there and then, you know, thank you, regardless if you get something or not. But one of the big questions that came up when we started the program was, well, you're not going to give them cash, are you? Because if you give them cash, they might buy drugs, or they might do something, right? And then it was just kind of like, let's take a step back here, because sometimes we unintentionally further marginalize and stigmatize people, right? So it would be like, you know, for an example, your firm, right? Like,
Yes.
I imagine you guys pay your employees on a biweekly basis, I would assume, right?
Right.
So you probably don't have rules that say you can't spend any of your money on an illegal substance, or you can't spend it on alcohol, or you can't spend a certain percentage of your paycheck on chocolate, because that's going to increase your chances of diabetes. You pay them, right? So it's just like, if we run a program, we pay them, and then we can talk about healthy norms, but we can't say you can't do this or you can't do that,
They're
because
going to do the opposite.
yeah, or maybe they will, or maybe they won't, right? Like, one of my big eye-opening things earlier in my career was, like, I'm an analytical person, so I just really wanted strong goals, strong performance indicators. Are we successful? Are we not? Like, is this program successful? So you're talking about supportive housing, and it's like, I want really tight performance indicators, like, you know, what percentage of people are we getting in here, and then are they transitioning over a period of time, and then you kind of go through it, and you're like, I'm looking at this completely wrong. So if you ask me now, especially in our more complex supportive housing programs, what is success? I had one individual, and I had the privilege in 2010 of driving him to his house for the very first time.
Wow.
And he had been in our shelter and a different shelter before that for almost 30 years.
Wow.
And pretty much lived outside. And this person drank probably 2 or 3 bottles of Listerine every single day, and would drink it in the morning, obviously become quite inebriated, pass out for most of the day, and just repeat. And it was quite the challenge to get them. First, we got them into our managed alcohol program. So we started to being able to manage their alcohol. They weren't drinking Listerine anymore. They had a managed amount of alcohol. So we started managing their alcohol. Then we started managing their physical health. Then we got to stock. Then we started to get to working on the mental health, the trauma, build them into the community. But where I'm going with this is, when we moved him in, you know, and we get there, I stop the car, we walk up, you know, hand him the key for his room, and he's holding the key upside down.
Does not hold.
Didn't know how to do it.
Never had a key.
Never had a key.
Never had a key, right? So,
Amazing.
you know, I kind of
Wow.
just joke and grab the key and I open it for him, and we go in the room. And these were the Oaks on Maryville, really nice rooms, really large queen size bed, you know, a TV, their own bathroom. He just sits on the bed. He kind of does that little bounce, you know, when you go into a hotel room for the first time, turns on the TV, you know, make sure his favorite channel's there. It is. He's happy. And then he goes in the bathroom. This is probably the first time in his life he's ever had his own bathroom, right? If you think about it, in the shelter system, you're sharing a bathroom with 250 other men, right? So it's kind of like, this is my own toilet. This is my own bathtub. This is my own bed. And this is like unfortunately, he's passed away now. This was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, but I have a very good rapport with him. But he could be a gnarly, you know,
Sure.
a cantankerous man at times. And so he sits on the bed, just hard as stone. And then he just breaks down crying. So a certain level of vulnerability where I'm just sitting there speechless. And the best thing I could offer him is just silence and reflection,
Sure.
right? And then after a couple of minutes, he just started talking, and he was just like, thank you for building this, and thank you for bringing me here. And it's just the reminder of like why we do what we do, right? Sometimes we just forget that. But for this individual too, when we start talking about like goals, right? This is a man, even though we moved him in there, for the first 6 months, he didn't take his winter boots off or his winter jacket when he went to bed. Because for the last 30 years, if he took his boots off or his jacket, someone was going to steal it. So it was his home. So the goal now isn't like from an analytics perspective. It's like, how do we build trust and community with this individual so that they take their boots off when they go to bed? Or how do we get him to stop hiding chicken wings in his pillowcase because he doesn't know the next time he's going to be able to get his favorite meal? So for me, it was just a really eye-opening experience where it was like, tone down the KPIs and just meet people where they are, that basic level of humanity.
Some of these issues that they've experienced that are far different than most of us will ever experience.
Absolutely.
Like, no, when you're saying that, what a powerful experience for you to be witness to participate in. But most people that are listening to this will never understand what that feels like.
Right.
And like the shepherd's footprint is so much bigger than the public knows, right? Even myself, like Shawn's, obviously we speak about, everything going on and the interactions that he's had with you and shepherds. It really, even for myself, I was like, what? There's that much going on. There's that much of a footprint. I thought it was King Edward.
You know what? And again, opportunities and challenges, right? So when I started at Shepherds of Good Hope, as a volunteer in 2001, we had one building, right? We had, the corner of King Edward and Murray, actually two buildings, so on both sides. And it was actually 2 years earlier in 1999 that we'd actually bought 256 King Edward. On the other side, we have 233 Murray Street. And our budget was probably $300,000 or $400,000 to run our programs. And we probably had, 30 or 40 employees. And when we made this concerted effort to build our continuum of care for supportive housing all over the city, we now have close to 300 employees. We have close to 400 volunteers. We couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. They're phenomenal. That number also then peaks, at certain seasons. But when we finish building 233 Murray, and when we, hopefully put a shovel to the ground, 2 or 3 years for our next Maryville project, all of a sudden we have $100 million worth of capital infrastructure.
Amazing.
Amazing in the sense of like, wow, we've really put a dent in this non-market housing. But then the finance side comes in, which is like, how do we maintain this infrastructure, right? Sure. So, one of the things that we've done a much better job of in the last couple of years is recognizing that, yes, we do great social profit work, but this is also a business, and you have to look at it through a business lens where, wow, okay, if we start looking at 2030, how are we maintaining this capital infrastructure on an annual basis? Because a conservative number says we're probably spending $2.5 or $3 million a year just maintaining our infrastructure.
Right.
And when we look at our current cash flow, we don't have that, right? So it's just really challenging us right now to say, like, how are we showing up 5 years from now? So really working with all three levels of government and saying, like, these are the essential dollars that we need. Yeah. And then also working, with our foundation to say, you guys are doing really great work, but as we expand and grow, how do you expand and grow to support us as well?
It's amazing in some regards. Like, I'm listening and I'm thinking, wow, that is amazing growth. But then in some regards to your comment earlier about the goal of eradicating, it's the problem or the solution, as you mentioned, is getting bigger. We want it to get smaller. So ideally, we would want your outcome is to see the organization get smaller when that's not happening right now. So
yeah. You would see a lot of people say a lot of the times in our field where like our ultimate vision is that we don't exist, right? That's not completely true for us. So we do have a goal that, you know, by the end of this strategic plan, and if not definitely the next strategic plan, I would love to challenge us to say, if we're really moving the needle on eradicating chronic homelessness, we do not need 3 men's shelters within a kilometer radius in the downtown core. Frankly, we wouldn't need 3 large men's shelters in our city.
Right.
So my hand's gone up first to say, I would love to give up our emergency shelter program. I would love the concept of converting 256 King Edward into some aspect of non-market housing that would have a tremendous impact, not only on the byward market, but just on like that kind of final push on ending homelessness. So to your point, Shawn, I would love not to have shelter programs in the future, because that would, to me, tell us that we're moving forward in the right direction, where we're not having that issue.
Like a litmus test. It's going to say things are working.
But we'll always need a certain level of supportive housing, because there's just some individuals that have such complex needs that they need staffing presence. So with our continuum, the great thing about it is, you might be in one of our residences that have a high ratio of staff, where we really work with you. But as you stabilize, now you have the opportunity to move into a different level of our continuum where there's less staff present, with the eventual goal then that you might leave supportive housing altogether and either go to affordable housing, rent geared to income housing, or maybe just regular housing.
Sure.
So what we're building is very intentional with where we're going, not only as an organization, but ideally as a city.
No matter how much we get this perfect, we're always going to have a need there, clearly.
Yes.
So let's talk about yourself as a person. So clearly all these levers are pulling at you. You've got, we've talked a lot about the success of the Shepherds in general. How do you manage that? You talked about culture earlier, your amazing culture at Shepherds. So I'd like to find out, like, how do you best become a mindful leader in your organization? But then also, how do you separate work and home so that you can unplug from all that?
Yeah, I wonder if my wife is listening to this and be able to get it right.
You can just send her the link.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
I mean, that's a great question, right? So I'm very conscious of my presence, I guess you could say, right? So it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. So what I'll say is what happened probably at the very beginning of the pandemic, right? Things are super busy. I'm a senior vice president at the time. We're going through really fast rate. COVID hasn't actually hit us yet, but we know it's probably coming because we see it happening in China. And I think it was at that time, this is February 2020, it was slowly moving into Korea. And so what had happened to me on a personal perspective is that, so I have a twin sister. And so my twin sister had lived in Southeast Asia for the last 15 years. She has 2 boys the exact same age as my girls. And she was really tired. She's just like, I'm tired. And I'm like, Stephanie, you're tired because you have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, like I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. But she just kept being tired. And then she kept going into her doctors in the emergency room. And then what happened was they discovered, after she was really adamant, that she had leukemia. And so they were great where they started her treatment right away, but there was complications within that treatment, and then we lost her 10 days later. And then I couldn't go and visit her because the country was on lockdown. Ugh. And so I struggled with a lot of grief at the time. And what that did, though, was it gave me a lot of personal reflection on how do I want to show up in the world. Right? And what do I value most? And I really started to pour my energy into something called conscious leadership. So really focusing on being mindful, being present in the moment, because I had realized as an executive that I had fallen into this pattern where my mind was always 7 moves ahead, like a chess player. And I had been really handsomely rewarded over the last 15 years of fixing things and being innovative and moving the needle on all these issues, but I wasn't present. And, my twin sister was the epitome of presence. And I used to joke at the time and roll my eyes and be like, oh, Stephanie, she's like this granola eating, hippie off in the, and I laugh now because that's what I'm becoming, right? So, in my 20s and 30s, all the leadership skills that I thought were incredibly important, those aren't my top tools anymore, right? My top tools are the soft skills that I thought, oh, those are those vanilla things, right? But those are the essential things we need as leaders today, right? We need to show up with empathy. We need to show up with compassion. For me, my biggest challenge weren't even those things. It was allowing myself self-compassion. I was always just very hard on myself, and just allowing myself to give myself the same level of empathy that I gave others. But the presence with my family was the big part, right? Which is, like, our work is, like, I'm so privileged to have to lead such an organization with such a powerful vision, but it's also very challenging work that doesn't turn off, right? Shepherds of Good Hope is 365, 24/7. Like, our operations don't sleep. And our frontline staff, who are magicians, are in our residences and our buildings 24/7, right? So, I mean, I get the same velocity of emails at 9 o'clock in the morning that I do at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that I do at 8 o'clock at night, that I do at 2 o'clock in the morning. So you really have to balance how you show up as a leader and how you manage. And then, so for me, it was a big step back of, like, I don't want to be a control enthusiast, right? Like, I have really good staff. I need to hold them capable. And so I mentioned what happened with my sister, and then I mentioned, my journey with conscious leadership. But then that also brought me to an executive program at Royal Roads. So it was an executive coaching. And out of all the postgraduate programs I've done, and I've done a lot, that was by far the most transformational, where we really spent a year just focusing on our values, our personal values, and how we want to show up in the world. So that really taught me that since my sister had passed, I had gotten really comfortable being in the shadows, right? I was a subject matter expert. I was a senior VP. I knew the job forward and backwards, but I was on autopilot. And then the program taught me with the values of, like, no, I have so much more to offer the world. And I'm going to step out of those shadows, and I'm going to go into that, to that light, or to that presence. And I'm going to amplify the work that we do, but I'm going to lead it, because I really believe that's a gift that I have, right? And so when I looked at my values, it was like, that's what I want to do. I really want to leave a legacy and a lasting imprint on our city, because it's so doable. But at the same time, I also want to be an amazing dad and husband, right? So, and that's incredibly important for me. So I'm very, very intentional about that now.
It really is, it's all hands on deck for this operation, right? And it's and I can, when I hear you speak with such passion about it, it's very encouraging to know that there's humans out there that care as much as you do, right? And it's I guess for the people that are listening, like, if you want to volunteer, how?
Yeah, I mean,
Where? Like, what does that look like? Like, you've got high school students that need X amount of hours. You got, people that just want to come and help, and in whatever capacity that they can. Like, what does that really look like for somebody? Like, it's not, hey, I'm here, let's do something. Like, I'm sure there's a little bit of a process for it.
Well, the most important part is, like, what is the actual step, right? So, I mean, look up our website, right? Shepherds of Good Hope. I mean, we have a link for volunteering. You can look me up, Stephen Bartolo, on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm happy to help you with it. But because we now are so geographically diverse across the city, it's not like you have to say, oh, but I live in the West End or the East End, and it's really hard to get downtown. We have residences in every neighborhood now. I mean, the main things that we need are people to help with breakfast, with lunch, with dinner, but even things as simple as, I had a great conversation with one of our new volunteers in our Canada facility yesterday or the day before, where she's been coming in now for the last 3 or 4 weeks, where she does yoga. So she comes in once or twice a week and actually just does yoga. And, at first it was one person, and the next week it was 4, and the next week it was 7. Yeah. Some people literally just show up too and just sit and have conversation like this, just what you and I would consider to be normal. They want the same thing. And the consistent message that I get from every single volunteer that stays for, the year is they get more back from the experience than what they gave.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly powerful.
You tried the yoga?
You know what I said to her? Because I just saw her. I'm like, I totally need to do this because like sometimes fair to admit it, like touching my toes can be a challenge, right?
Yeah.
So
It's fun. I think Corey's done a bit of yoga.
Yeah, for
I've
sure.
done some yoga.
Yeah,
I think it's
for sure.
I think it's a great activity when you have a chance to do it, because a lot of times you talk to people and they haven't done it. So then it's like, to me, it's like trying to sell it a little bit. You have to say, you should really try it. But I think it's it's an activity that really centers you.
Absolutely. It's we don't get more flexible with age. And
Same as meditation, right? Meditation comes up a lot on our podcasts.
Yeah.
So yoga, meditation, I think it's these are great activities to roll into your practice every day.
Shawn is able to meditate on the fly at times. And so we've been in meetings and you can see Shawn with a very long closing of the eyes. I see him breathe in, centering himself, and then his eyes start to open and he breathes again.
are
And
you curious about it?
Oh, I know exactly what's happening there. So it's I've known him long enough that I know when he's doing some on the fly meditation in a meeting. So it's,
also focus on I do walking meditation every morning. So I literally take my dog out in the morning and do a nice long walk. Shawn knows my executive coach well. Shout out to Rebecca Wilson, but
amazing.
she is amazing. And so she really focuses on conscious leadership. She's also really focuses on yoga. So she's probably rolling her eyes when I tell her I can't touch my toes, but we'll work on that, Rebecca. But being mindful, I mean, at the end of the day, you're really talking about just really focusing on being more self-aware and being more compassionate on how you show up as a human being every day, right? So the great thing about this conscious leadership or this mindfulness journey is that we're human, we're messy, right? So, in conscious leadership, we kind of use the simple term, are you above the line or are you below the line, right? Are you self-aware or are you not self-aware? And the majority of the time, we're below the line. But when you focus on self-awareness, when you catch yourself down there, it's just to have self-compassion with yourself and bring yourself back up, right? So self-awareness and presence is very important to me, and I focus on that with great intention every day.
This is where I got connected with Rebecca and I really enjoyed it, was to really connect what I was already doing in my day-to-day, which I was already doing meditation and some yoga and some fitness and just trying to be more centered as a human being, show up better to my marriage and to my business. But then it was this transformation where I want to say, okay, I want to take those skills and I want to start bringing them into my workplace.
Right.
So as a leader, what I wasn't clear on was, how do I connect those two? Because it's easy for me to see how I can do that at home. But what's unclear for me how I can do that, what kind of leadership skills should I have or could I have that would create a more mindful workspace? And I think there's benefits to it, as you can clearly see. That's what you're doing in creating a great culture in your organization. What other things do you like to do, Stephen, on your time, like when you're not working? What other interests do you have?
Well, what are my? So, I mean, the obvious. I mean, my girls are at this period right now, right, where one is turning 7 and one is turning 10. So the reality is 90% of my life when I'm not working surrounds them. One of them is a competitive swimmer, so she's in the pool a gazillion hours a week. The second one is actually becoming a competitive swimmer in September, so that's going to double. That's our main thing right now. In terms for me, pre-COVID, I loved playing softball on a weekly basis. I loved playing squash. I haven't gotten back into it since COVID. I need to. My personal ultimate hobby, which I'm perfectly comfortable with admitting, is fantasy baseball and fantasy football. I love those. But what I've also really gotten into is investing. So,
perfect.
I really love investing. I was really conscious of like really wanting to max out my TSFAs, and then I got to that point where I did, and then the strategy of what I wanted to put into those TSFAs, and then even with my RSPs, right? So in the social profit space, we don't have defined benefits, right? So we have a defined contribution plan. And Shepherds of Good Hope actually has one of the most generous ones in the industry. It's a 6% match.
That's
So
excellent.
it's 12%, right?
Sure.
And so I've had that since I was 22 years old. But one of the things that I'm also really passionate about is even with our staff is just like, hey, even though you're choosing this industry, you might not be able to retire at 35, but you can still retire comfortably if you're smart about it, because compound interest is a very powerful tool, right? So, and I'm passionate about that topic. So one of the things I always explain to them is, even when I was really young in my career, the moment you get to that point throughout the year where you've hit your CPP and your EI contributions for the year, right? So obviously earlier in your career, you might not even hit it, or you're getting it in December. But then you might get to a point where it's the summer or the late spring. And then so for me, it was the moment I always hit that, every penny that would then be added on to my net income for the rest of the fiscal year, I would talk to my finance department and I would say, add that onto my RSPs.
Keep it going.
Right? So just increase it, because it wasn't money in my monthly budget that that I needed, right? It was extra money. So instead of just spending it on like, I can just an extra night out with the guys, it was, okay, now that I'm putting away 12% of my RSPs, now I'm putting away 18 and 22 and 24. And I've done that for over 20 years, right? And then also, and obviously I'm not giving anyone financial advice here. This is just my own.
Go ahead. Feel free. It's a financial podcast.
But for me, it was just also being like, when am I retiring? Just being very intentional, right? Of like, okay, I'm at least 10 years out, 20 years out. I can be less conservative, right? So it was like really looking at what my returns are, which is like, what's my own risk tolerance, right? Like I'm okay with those swings, right? So like, that one year where it might be, a -7 or a -8, but that next year might be a +22 or a +23. I like that better, being plus 10 years out, than the 2%, the 3%, the 4%. And then what I'm always trained on now, and this was even for me, even in my TSFA passion, is that, whenever the market started to go down and people started to sell, I just get excited, and that's when I buy, right? Sure. So like I was thinking even last year, I think it was October, that was the weak spot last year, I think, right?
That's right.
And particularly for me, it's I've learned in my own passion, I would consider myself to be a low volatility investor. So I'm attracted to more of like those kind of blue chip dividend stocks, right? Sure. And then they all crashed in October, like all of them crashed. And I jumped on every single one of them. So I have a pretty diversified portfolio, and it's not only that the returns are obviously looking really good now, because now we just announced with the interest rates going, it's, in my opinion, it's starting to be go time for dividends. But I locked in insane dividend rates, right? Yes. Like, 5%, 7%, 8%, when historically they're 2% or 3%. And I have no plan on using those dividends. I'm going to be dripping them for the next, 20, 25 years. And when you actually do some scenarios and you pull that out, 25 years from now, you're like, that's $50,000 to $60,000 a year in tax-free dividends.
Yes.
That's not even the capital. So anyways, I'm passionate about that. And then, my wife, Orla, kind of, I can say she rolls her eyes when I talk about it, but I think she's very appreciative that I do these type of things. But I'm also starting to teach it with my kids too, right? Like I notice my oldest daughter, she's a saver. So she gets her allowance and she just throws it away and she won't spend it. But I'm like, you should start to learn this kind of philosophy of for every dollar that you get, it's okay to spend 80 cents, but save 20, right? And if you have that life philosophy and you build that into what you're doing, you're going to be in a great spot. But don't hoard it all, because you have to live life too.
That's right.
But at the same time, make sure you're saving something, and then be disciplined enough not to take it away, right?
But music to our ears.
I remember when I was teaching the kids, my two daughters, when they were younger, and I had at their cottage weekend, and I'd piled up 10 piles of 10 chips, poker chips. And I said, okay, every year that one pile is going to produce one chip. So I put all the chips in front. So there'd be 10 chips in front of the 10 piles. I said, so some people would just, this is producing that. But I said, or you can spend these piles of chips as much as you want, but then you only have one, let's say one pile of chips that produces one chip every year. So my oldest daughter, which was probably 9 at the time, said, well, Dad, why would I do that? Why don't I just keep spending the chips that it makes every year? And I'm like, bingo.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you should be doing. Good way of looking at it. But it starts, start thinking about how money can work for you and how you can build some wealth.
I'm going to try that trick with my oldest when I get
Sure.
home.
So,
I like
so
that.
when did your interest in money and investing, where did that kind of start for you? Like what was that junction for you?
Well, you know what? It was probably early for me, even just, with the line of work that I chose, obviously be very passionate about the organization and the vision, but I also knew, frankly, I was leaving some money on the table in terms of, not taking my graduate degrees and going into the private sector, for example. So then it was, how can I be more strategic to have my money work for me? So that started early on, and even with my RSPs, right? Which was just like, okay, if I'm just putting the minimum in and I look at where it's going to be forecasting in 20 years, that's okay, but it could be way better. How do I get there? And then obviously going back and doing my EMBA, we spend a lot of time talking about that. But I've always just been fascinated by compound growth. And it's one of those things where it's like most people never experience the power of it because they're too impatient.
Yep.
Or they have to pull it out for some reason. But like, if you actually just let it grow, and then you let what grows grow, and then you let that happen over a 10-year period, and in particular, if you start this in your 20s and you're talking about like a 20, 30, 40-year compound,
Look out.
the numbers are insane.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Right.
crazy.
So like even in our line of work with our younger staff that are in their 20s and 30s, like sometimes once a year we'll do like an RSP 101 day where we just show them some charts with compound growth. Because when you're starting out at the beginning, you're like, oh, I'll never get there.
Yeah.
But when you see it over a 20-year period or a 30-year period. So my advice to all these people is be like, well, when should I start? Like, I'm too old now. What's the right time to start? And the time to start is now.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Just do it. Right?
It's the rule of 72, right? Like how quickly can you double money based on your risk profile, right? So it's kind of, and you're so bang on. It's, 'cause people will just, oh, that made 5%. Oh, okay. But but next year you got the 5% on the 5%.
That's
Right. And it
Yeah.
just keeps going.
Yeah,
And
and-
it just keeps jumping. And so people lose sight of that. People spend too much time on their devices looking at the news and thinking about, oh, the world is in trouble and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And we say to people all the time, show me at one point in time, at any point in history where we didn't recover, where we didn't figure it out.
Listen, totally. I will say though, I'm actually appreciative of the people that do panic, because what happens is when I'm following the news, and I do, and you hear something. I mean, a classic example was last year. When was this? This was, I forget what time of the year, but a particular. Am I allowed to mention particular stock?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Like, so there was a particular stock, Canadian stock, Go Easy.
Yeah.
Right. And then the news came out of like, oh, the government's going to be changing the minimum amounts that they can charge. And the stock tanked overnight. I think it went from, I don't know, like 120 to like 87, just like
Bloodbath.
right.
Yeah.
And then for me, it was like, oh my God, like,
Thank you.
I am jumping in, because when you look at what they're doing and you look at their business model for where Canada's going, you're just like, this is needed.
Yeah.
Right. And so I went all in on that. And I think, I don't know, I don't check every day, but I think it's closing in on 200.
Yep.
Right. And its dividend is in the low 2s. But
Yep.
I mean, I locked in a dividend in the high 5s that is compounding at over 20% a year. Right.
Yep.
So it's just like when some people panic too much, which is also one of the real values of having advisors like you guys, right? Where you guys can just be like, no. Like what's your risk tolerance? What's your plan?
Sure.
But if you're just watching the markets in the news every day, you would literally buy something and you would pull it within 24 hours. And then you're never going to get anywhere, right?
Nowhere.
Set a plan, you reevaluate your plan, but don't jump every time the market moves, because the market's going to move.
It's like high tech last year in the U.S. If you had if we reacted to that 24 months ago, you said, "Oh, this is no good. It's down 20 or 30%. I'm out of here." But you would have missed everything that happened.
Oh my God.
September,
Wow,
October
like in
onwards.
NVIDIA, like
Yeah.
oh my God, like that's just insane.
I'm still nervous in terms of, I think I don't know if it's today, it's this week, right? Where they just did like I don't know, like a 13-1 or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, it's coming.
Where it's just like, at what point, right? But it just keeps going, up.
Well, you can slice and dice the arguments either way, as you always can with every trade that's out there, and you kind of look and you're like, I'm pretty sure, AI is not, even though it's a buzzword, I'm pretty
It's sticking
sure
around.
it's sticking around.
Oh, totally.
Pretty sure it's real. I'm pretty
This
sure.
internet thing has taken off, I think. I think this
Yeah,
internet thing has taken off.
I think so. I think this is going to go, right? And so I think, we're entering an interesting period because it's almost like a super cycle that's in front of us, right? Because we have, depending on your argument on battery, where we're going, I personally think it's hybrid is the end answer, but we're not ready for this massive uptick on the pull of our electrical grids. We're about to experience the biggest capital spend in utilities that we've ever seen in our lifetime. If we moved up to even 10% of the population on battery, we're in the dark right now.
Yeah. Listen,
It's not happening.
I've got a smile on my face because, like, again, if Orla's, this is my happy place, right? This is my zone, the stuff I love to talk about. And this is exactly the same I'm telling people is like, you look at AI and it's exploding, but what you have to be able to do is step back and say, but what else is it impacting?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then for me, the biggest thing is the capacity to charge it.
Yes.
Right. So from a utility perspective,
Yes.
what does that look like? Right. And you look at the United States, where the AI is just exploding. They do not have the infrastructure right now, right?
Nor do we, right?
Right.
Nor does Canada.
Then what does that look like,
Yeah.
right? So when you're starting to look at some of these industry trends, like someone is going to have, like that, to me, that's the next boom.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's always a boom after, there's always this residual boom.
Yeah, we're early in on a lot of
Oh my
interesting
goodness.
stuff. Like Corey got me onto like 5G a few years ago. So we talk about 5G, and then I'm thinking about it from a phone perspective. Well, 5G is not my phone. And it's like, no, it's so much bigger than that.
Totally.
It's data transfer. It's the speed. It's the ability to have farms that can be interconnected so they can understand the cattle's movement and have they eaten and have they not eaten, and the profitability and the success, and like farms. Like, where did the farms fit into 5G? But there's these ancillary operations and businesses that get affected by AI and 5G and
Isn't
internet.
it insane
and
though? And it does all your
unbelievable.
performance
Robotics.
indicators for
It's
you, right? Like,
unbelievable.
as we're doing our strategic plan right now, like one of the things we had said, it's a 5-year strategic plan. So we've actually added like adapting AI into our strategic plan. And like, one of our senior leaders was like, yeah, I feel like, probably by year 3 or year 4 of our strategic plan, we should have like a good AI strategy, right? And I was like, guys, like at the velocity this world is going with
6
AI,
weeks.
We're gonna need
like-
6 months from now. We need to have
Yeah.
one.
I'm like, this time next year, the
yeah.
entire world is going to be somewhat different because of AI. So like
100%.
every organization, doesn't even matter what industry you're in, you
100%.
have to adapt to it, right?
Even if it's not in your workplace, your online banking, your streaming service, your everything and anything, any new vehicle is full of AI. Every piece of tech is full of AI now. Like, it's just it's astounding what is happening in your, note taking, administrative work, all these things. There's the other side of this, which probably is an interesting conversation with somebody like yourself, is how many jobs in the lower income tiers are going to not exist.
Because
And
of it.
are we going to have to go to a universal income benefit?
Right. And that's hard to explain, right? Like when I look at my particular industry, like I don't think AI is going to be able, at this point anyways, to be able to be boots on the ground, to be present with complex issues. But when I look at a lot of the work that surrounds what we're doing, and I think about my children, right? Like, the ages 7 and 10, which is this new generation Alpha, which, by the way, what a cool generation name, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's great.
Like
Yeah.
Generation Alpha.
Way better than Generation X, right? That's,
Yeah. Yeah.
Y,
Or the
No, we're X, right?
X,
we're X.
Y.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's-
But this is the generation, the alpha generation, that is going to be growing up working alongside robots and AI.
Yeah.
And, you know, what we think are jobs now will not
Not a chance.
exist
Not a
in 15 years. And it's not doom and gloom. It's like there's just opportunity here, and it just looks different, right?
Yeah.
But like, you know, with my kids right now, when I hear them every day, they change, right? I'm going to be I want to be a teacher. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a firefighter. I'm just like, the world is just going to look so different.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you know, optimistically, much better. But like a universal income, people keep talking about that, right? And I think there's been enough studies that show it works, right? So
we'll have to do something, right? We won't really have a choice there. And it's, you know, you see it, you know, you even go to the grocery store, the self-checkouts and, you know, all the, you know, fast food chains are all moving to that, right? It's, you know, and yes, we want to touch someone and we want somebody to deal with our problems when we're ordering our coffee, but do you really need to order your coffee from a person?
Yeah, I know. I've been trying to train my mom to get her used to the new AI revolution, right? In terms of like having to push the buttons at the.
Not doing it.
I always joke with my mom, and I'm like, we're working on roundabouts first.
Yeah.
The rules of roundabouts, and after we figure out roundabouts, we'll touch AI.
It's incredible. It's incredible. So much change. As I was talking, and we're talking about money, and just the challenges of getting started with that. You know, you're putting away money early on in your career. I couldn't help but think and relate to even just the differences that someone can make by adding just a little bit of time into a organization like the Shepherds. You know, it's hard sometimes to start building your wealth or to save, but it's also sometimes hard to make a change in your life to say, I'm going to donate or I'm going to give. But it made me think of this analogy that everybody's probably familiar with, but it's about the kid standing on the beach and he's throwing these starfish back in the ocean. And someone says, hey, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I'm throwing the starfish back in the ocean. And the gentleman says, well, you can't throw all the starfish back in the ocean. It's not going to make any difference. And he goes, made a difference to that one. So I think I
love that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you're talking about, we may not be able to help every single person. We may not, you know, if you donate or give cash or whatever, see someone that's needing help, sure. Sometimes they're not all going to get up that moment and make a change. But that day that you help or you offer to give help, that might be the day that makes a life-altering change to that one person. So I think that to me is, you know,
it's an investment in humanity.
It is. And you know what? Sometimes people are just like, well, I don't have that type of money to donate, right? And in their minds, they're thinking, you know, $10,000 or $5,000 or even hundreds of dollars. But I mean, we have a lot of people that literally do, you know, $10 or $20 monthly donations. And when we have multiple people doing that on a monthly basis, that gives us the flexibility to do what we do, right?
Yeah.
Like we couldn't run our innovative services right now without our foundation, you know, that is, you know, working with, you know, donors across the city of Ottawa. So we're incredibly appreciative of our donors, but it could be that small, right? It has a huge impact, like you said, Shawn, right? And you also get a tax deduction, right? So it's like one of those things where it's like, you know, when certain people in their lives where they start to make a certain level of income and they maybe are in a bit more of a privileged position, you also realize that, you know, you have to really start thinking about your tax planning. And a lot of the times when you are making donations, that's actually very helpful to your tax planning. And it's a win-win because it's actually helping social profit organizations thrive and solve a lot of complex issues in society, right? So just really reminding people about the you know, the importance of donating if you can, but also that it doesn't have to be a big number, right? I mean, I'm not going to be disappointed if someone wants to give us a large amount of money, but even something as small as $5 or $10 a month makes a huge difference, right?
So if someone's listening right now and thinks, you know what, this has been really enjoyable. I want to be able to give. I want to be able to help this organization. How can they donate right now?
Yeah. So one of the great things right now is that we've made it really easy on our website. Right. So if you look up Shepherds of Good Hope, www.sghottawa.com, right off the bat, we have a big red button that takes you right to the
donate now.
And our foundation does a great job of working with them right through to the point where they, you know, they get their receipt. So
Stephen, I really enjoyed today. I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to Corey and I about many of the issues, yourself personally, your journey, the humanitarianism that goes into how you lead. It's been very impactful.
No, it's amazing, right? And it's nice to be able to try to, push this out within our own networks, and maybe we can turn a few heads your way. Maybe we can just make people realize, I didn't quite realize how much they're actually doing, right? And so it's wonderful. And thank you for being the human that you are, and thank you for joining us today.
You guys are great. This was completely my pleasure, and hopefully one day I look forward to coming back on it again. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Keep up the great work in the city.
Thanks for joining us. If you liked what you just watched, please like us and please subscribe.
Come on over to our webpage, ecivda.com, ECIVDA.com.
Until next time.